If you can affect tissue from a variety of different spaces, we can create space in the joint in a variety of different ways. Sometimes the setup just might not be the right setup for you to get what you need out of it. So this one has benefited me quite a bit. I just take the arm behind the back. So right now we're in internal rotation of the shoulder. I want you to sit up nice and tall. I don't want you to slouch forward and roll the shoulder down and forward. I want you to stand up nice and tall here. Today we're going to show you 5 setups that you can use for shoulder internal rotation, stretch, and pails and rails. Before we get started, make sure you smash the subscribe button so you never miss a post from me again. Pails and rails stands for progressive angular isometric loading and regressive angular isometric loading. Progressive just stands for the tissue that we're putting on stretch. Regressive is the tissue that is closing down the angle of the joint. So if I'm talking about my shoulder going into internal rotation, my progressive tissue would be the tissue that's getting longer, which is the tissue back here in the back of the joint. So that's the tissue that's being put on stretch. The regressive tissue would be the tissue on the front side of the joint because the joint angle is closing down and it's becoming shorter. So that's the difference between progressive and regressive tissue as we talk about pails and rails. Now the first setup that I'm going to show you is a common setup that most people use, and it's called the sideline sleeper stretch. Check it out. Stretch. So what I would normally do is place a yoga block underneath the head here, and then from here what I'm going to do is make sure my humerus is coming directly out from my shoulder, so not up at this angle, not down at this angle, but just straight out. From here, I have my elbow at 90 degrees, and I'm going to take myself into as much external rotation or internal rotation that I can control under my own power. From there, I'm going to take my top hand, and I'm going to clasp it right on the top of my wrist and hand, and I'm going to take myself just slightly past that range of motion that I have. Now we're looking for a stretch back here behind the shoulder joint. If this closed position, so a lot of people like to do it in this closed position, if this closed position is too much for the shoulder here, then I suggest leaning out of it just a little bit, because when I lean out of it a little bit, I get a little bit more room and I can target that tissue a little bit. But the emphasis is that we want to try and find that posterior capsule tissue. So that's the stretch we want. Once you feel that stretch, it doesn't need to be deep, it just needs to be a stretch. You're going to hold that stretch for 2 minutes. After 2 minutes, you're going to begin to try and rotate your shoulder this direction. So you're going to ramp up slowly to your maximum effort over the course of time. Okay, so you're ramping up, you ramp up to your maximum effort, and once you've ramped up to your maximum effort, you're going to ease off of that and you're going to begin to try and rotate the opposite direction. So you're going to try to rotate away from where your hand is at and try to contract this stuff on the front side of the joint that pulls you into more internal rotation. Once again, make sure you have a yoga block or something here to support your head and neck. This next setup is a little bit different. It's a standing setup, and I really like this position because it just gives you the ability to do the stretch anywhere. Sometimes you don't have a space to do it on the floor, so this is a great option. Check it out. Standing internal rotation sleeper stretch. It's similar to the sideline sleeper stretch, but this time you're going to just have your arm up against a wall. I like to get my hips in up against the wall as well. And from here, what I do is, because you have a gravity assist, so we can close off this joint, and when we close off this joint a little bit more, you get more stretch in the posterior capsule of the tissue. If you open up a little bit more, for those of us who may have a little sensitivity on the front side of that shoulder, that's okay. We still get a little bit of stretch in the back, but maybe it's not as extreme. From here, we're going to try and internally rotate as much as we can, and from there, I'm going to take my shoulder and move slightly past what I had there. I'm going to hold that for 2 minutes. After 2 minutes, I'm going to begin my PAILs contraction, which is trying to ramp this direction. Okay, so I'm going to slowly ramp that up to my maximum effort. My rails contraction following is going to be pulling away, trying to get more internal rotation, utilizing this front tissue of the joint. This next setup from Quadruped I really like. One of the reasons I like it is because it gives you an opportunity to take the bone and put a little bit of force into the tissue. So because you're in quadruped position on this next one, you'll see that when you're in that internal rotation position, you're now putting a little bit of gravity and a little weight through the joint. And so that typically gives me a little bit more feedback to the joint, and I really like this setup. Check it out. So for internal rotation pails and rails from a kind of quadruped setup, we can come down into this position. So I'm on my hands and knees. I'm going to take this arm and I'm going to place it here on the floor. From there, I'm going to internally rotate as much as I can. I'm trying to find a stretch of this tissue back here. What being on the ground does is it loads that tissue and gives us a little bit of feedback into the joint. So what I can do is use my other hand and try and rotate a little bit further into more internal rotation. I'm going to hold there for 2 minutes. After 2 minutes, I'm going to begin my PAILs contraction, which is trying to rotate into my hand, so trying to do this motion here. I'm going to resist that, so I'm ramping up to my maximum effort. And then my rails contraction is going to be trying to pull away from that into more internal rotation, so trying to go this direction towards my other leg. Now, if you are a little bit more mobile and you feel like this setup, you want to support this setup in a different way, what we can do is use our opposite leg. This is a great one for BJJ players. So I take my hand out here, I'm going to take my leg in, and then I'm going to take that knee and pull myself into internal rotation from here. And I'll hold that stretch the same way. And now when I do my pails and rails, I'm doing it up against my leg, and I have a little bit of space of support with my other arm. This next setup I really like because it gives me an opportunity to stretch the tissue differently than normal. What I really like about this is it just gives you a different position to train internal rotation from. And oftentimes we get locked into, I must train internal rotation from this specific position or that specific position. But the truth of the matter is if you can affect tissue from a variety of different spaces, we can create space in the joint in a variety of different ways. Sometimes the setup just might not be the right setup for you to get what you need out of it. So this one has benefited me quite a bit. I just take the arm behind the back. So right now we're in internal rotation of the shoulder. I want you to sit up nice and tall. I don't want you to slouch forward and roll the shoulder down and forward. I want you to stand up nice and tall here. Now, the stuff that is on stretch is your posterior tissue here because we're in internal rotation. The stuff that is the regressive tissue is in the front. So we're going to hang out and hold that stretch for 2 minutes. After 2 minutes, we're going to begin our PAILs contraction. Our PAILs contraction, we're going to begin to try and drive the back of the hand against the lower back. And so as we begin to ramp that up, you should feel that tissue in the back of the shoulder joint start to fire up and start to light up. You're going to ramp that to your greatest, safest effort. And then once you come down from that effort, you're going to reverse that into your rails contraction. Now your rails contraction, you're going to try and lift the arm off the lower back. So you're trying to just get light on the back of the palm as you try and rotate the opposite direction, contracting this stuff on the front side of the joint. It might feel a little bit crampy because you haven't been in that space before, so I would take it easy the very first time around. Just remember, a crampy sensation is just a sensation that happens when our nervous system is just unfamiliar with the tissue. And so I want you to take it light on that very first time and just see what it feels like. Don't push into any pinchy sensations or any painful spots. That's a key fact that I need to point out to you as you're doing pails and rails and as you're putting yourself in these end range positions. Oftentimes I'll actually have people just start out with the pails contraction alone for a few weeks and just get familiar with just being in the position before introducing the rails contraction. The final position is a seated position. It's a really comfortable position, it's very convenient, and I like to use it when I'm sitting up against a wall, just kind of hang out in that position. It's very easy to accomplish. You can do it from a seat, from a bench, or from a box, or even from the floor. Check it out. So here I am in the seated position. I'm just going to have one leg out, or I can just cross my leg over like so. I'm going to rest my elbow right on top of my knee joint. I'm going to bend, I'm going to begin to go into internal rotation here. And so I'm trying to find as much internal rotation as I have under my own power. I'm looking for a stretch back here. I'm going to take my other hand and clasp it right over the top of the wrist. And I'm going to take myself a little bit further into internal rotation, looking for the stretch in the back of that shoulder there. Now, we don't want to feel any pinchy stuff here. If you feel pinchy stuff here, I want you to back out of that immediately and seek some help. What we can also do, since the joint is closed down here, is we can open up a little bit wider. So I can open up wider here, and I can find that stretch from here. So once we've found the stretch, we're going to hang out there. We're going to hold that for 2 minutes. After 2 minutes, we're going to begin our PAILs contraction, which is trying to go into external rotation against the resistance of your hand. You're going to ramp to your greatest, safest effort. And once you hang out there for about 10 seconds, we're going to reverse that and try and go into more internal rotation. So pulling away from the hand, contracting this regressive tissue on the front side of the joint as we try and find more internal rotation of that joint. Once again, as always, thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.